You're contemplating a divorce and you're wondering how in the heck you're going to pay for it. And not just that, you're wondering all the questions have to do with an attorney and money. And we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about, like, what do attorneys cost? How do they bill? Is it by the minute? Is it by the hour? And do they charge you for an email or a letter? And what about the extra services and how do you pay for it? So we're going to dive in and make sure you stay to the end, because at the end, we're going to talk about how you can go about paying for it, which is probably one of the biggest questions you may have. But right out of the gate, let's talk about a retainer fee. A retainer fee is a lump sum that an attorney is going to ask for. And this just puts money in the kitty, maybe you could call it that, set aside for you. And then as they bill you for the work that they're doing, they will start deducting from that kitty.
Biggest fear that a lot of women have when they're contemplating divorce is hiring an attorney. How do I hire an attorney? What do I do? And how much does it cost? Where am I going to get the money? And in this instance, I'm going to tell you, no matter what, the most important thing you can do is be prepared. Do your homework, do your research. That's why we're presenting all this information to you, so that you can understand the money side. The average cost of a divorce across the country can be, for a normal medium range divorce, $12,000 to $15,000 per side, people. Not just combined, per side. And that's a lot of money. And the retainer is the first big chunk of money that you're going to have to pay. Attorneys all require it. It allows them to process your divorce with your money, not their money. And so you need to be prepared up front. And what the retainer is it's a lump of cash they ask you for, you give it to them. And then they spend out of that for the cost of your divorce as they accrue, whether it be attorney's expenses, court costs, document preparation, as Elizabeth talked about, emails, letters they write, phone calls they make to other attorneys, whatever it could be. And that retainer is kind of that slush fund or kitty that's going to be able to get the ball rolling, but it will have to be re-upped when it's spent.
If you're wondering what questions to ask an attorney as you're getting started, we recorded a video on this topic just last week. So be sure to go back and check that out, and then come back to this video to hear more about the expenses and how you can plan for those. So in those expenses, you've left them, you've hired the attorney, you've paid the retainer fee, and now the attorney goes to work for you. The attorney is going to go through a lot of steps. They're going to ask you for a lot of information. And then as you give this information to them, they have to start weeding through it. They're going to be reading all the documents, reviewing everything. In many cases, they'll have a paralegal do a lot of this work. So when it comes to cost, you're paying them in increments. One of the questions you want to ask is, what are the increments? Is it every 15 minutes? Is it every 10 minutes? Is it 6 minutes? And you may be wondering, as I'm saying this, well, what does that even mean? Well, it means that if the attorney's sitting at his desk working on a project, and then your file comes in front of him and he's got to draft a letter, and it takes him 22 minutes from start to finish to draft that letter and get it back to his paralegal, he type up, and then she brings it back in to sign him, whatever time that was, 23.7 minutes. He's going to bill you accordingly. So if he bills you in 15-minute increments, and he just spent 33 minutes on something, then he's going to bill you for 15 minutes. And yeah, that's 45 minutes, and he only spent 33, but you used up 2 of the 15 increments and you started that third one. So it's important to find out how they bill. Now, you're probably not going to be able to figure out how that translates into your money, because you're not knowing what's going on in the office every day. But find that out. Ask them also, how much of the work will other associates in the office do? Is a paralegal going to be doing, 20% of the work and the effort? Is it 30%? Is it 50%? You know, how does that weigh out? Those are important things to be aware of. Once again, you're not going to be able to track it. You're not going to be able to calculate in your head how that all adds up, but it's helpful information for you as you're stepping into this.
One thing that I want to throw into this, and I think this is important, is, you know, you mentioned paralegal and you mentioned your attorney. Depending on the scope of your divorce, depending on how ugly it could get and how complicated it could be, you know, a lot of people say, I want to get the most expensive attorney I can get, if they can afford it, or I guess the most expensive attorney you can afford. And when you do that, what you want to ask them is, are there going to be any junior attorneys or any other attorneys working on my case? Because that is one way to save money, is to have your lead attorney who's going to represent you and be the face and the voice and the name on your divorce. But they a lot of times have a junior attorney that bills half as much as they do, that will do the bulk of the work along with a paralegal. So that's something to ask when you're working with that attorney. And I will tell you, one of the whammies that a client of mine got one time, she hired a major firm, big firm, lead attorney was expensive, no problem. We're going to have the junior attorney and paralegal to cut your expenses. But weekly, they had a 45-minute meeting to discuss her case so everyone was on the same page. And for that bill, she was paying all three, and in her case, 4 people's time for them to meet and debrief on her case. You know, and Elizabeth talked about increments for billing. You know, at first, when you hear, I'm going to bill you every 6.5 minutes, that sounds horrific. But it's actually better than the 15-minute cycle. And a lot of the attorneys that I've worked with and my clients have worked with, it's the 6.5 minutes. And it sounds weird and it sounds bad, but that is actually better for you. Because if they run over, as Elizabeth said, you're not paying for 13 minutes you didn't use. That would be 2 whole 6.5-minute increments. You'd rather pay for just the 6.5-minute increment. So don't freak out when they say that. That's actually a better way to do it for you.
Yeah, and I always think of the fax machine explanation. And I know that we don't really use fax machines much anymore. I don't know about in the case of an attorney's office, but I've always thought about, and I think this was because a coach talked to me about this one time, but it's like, how much time do you spend walking to the fax machine, putting the piece of paper in, punching the number in, hitting the send button, waiting for it to scroll through so you can pick the piece of paper up and walk back to your desk? Well, let's just put that into an attorney situation. Let's say an attorney, and he's not going to do it, but his paralegal goes to the fax machine to send a fax on your behalf. I would rather pay 6-minute increments, because probably that can be done in 6 minutes as opposed to 15 minutes. So to your point, Allison, yeah, the smaller the increment, the better served you're going to be in the overall picture of your billing. And then with that, most attorneys are providing itemized accountings of their time to you on a regular basis. And I would say most often it's a monthly basis. It's kind of like a typical billing cycle. Once your account gets drained down to a certain threshold, and the attorney should tell you that up front, then you'll have to replenish it back up to that retainer fee limit. So for example, let's say your retainer fee is $5,000, and let's say they will let you get down to $1,000 balance before they want you to replenish it. So it gets whittled away with the different activities. You hit the $1,000 mark, and now they're going to notify you, and you've got to put $4,000 back in that account to bring it back to the $5,000 limit. So that's how that process works. And I would say that a typical retainer is in the $4,000 to $5,000 range. Now, it may be different in cities like New York City and big metropolitan areas. I don't know, but I think commonly you can expect it to be around 5,000.
And that also depends on how expensive your attorney is. If you go with the kind of attorney that most people are going to hire, that $12,000 to $15,000 cost and the $4,000 to $5,000 retainer is pretty average. But if you are knowing you're in for a big battle and you need the best attorney in town, you need the one with the nickname like the snake, you're going to pay more. So let's answer the big questions in the room real quick, Elizabeth. Number one, why is it so expensive? What all gets involved in this? You're going to have your attorney's time to review everything, to consult with everything, for every phone call they make to the other attorney or any other professional working on your behalf, every phone call they have with you. So this is where being prepared, knowing what you want for every phone call you have with your attorney is a big good thing, because that's going to save you a lot of money. Every email they read and respond to or forward, all of those things cost. You've got court costs. You've got professionals that are kind of, may have to come in and testify. You've got costs of accumulating documentation. And then you have your court or your mediation appearances, when the attorney is going to be sitting there all day long in mediation or in court. And then the question is, how many attorneys are going to appear in court? Big kicker. You hire an attorney with a junior attorney, you show up for court, it's a minimal little filing, and both of them are there. And now you're paying for both of them. So you want to know and be aware in advance of all these things that can make that divorce get more expensive, and ask the questions up front and work with your attorney based on your ability to pay the big expenses when they come up.
One of the things to keep your focus on is your activity. You can't control what the attorney does with your file, how long he works on it, who works on it in his office. But what you can control is your deliverables. So when the attorney asks you for bank statements and investment account statements and so forth, make sure you do your homework. Make sure you give them every single page of the statement, including the backs, including the summary page, including the page that has just all this legalese on it that doesn't really affect your account. And here's why. The attorney needs every single page of a statement. And if they don't get it, they don't know what might be on it. So if you hold back that disclaimer, that privacy policy page or whatever it is, they don't know that that's what the page is. For all they know, there's another page of detail that they're not seeing. So now they've got to reach back to you and ask you for that. So they just sent you an email, they just made a phone call, and they just wasted their time reviewing that statement that was incomplete in their mind anyway. And now you've got to go resubmit it. And now they've got to start the process all over again. So just make sure that when they ask you for something, give it to them in the most absolute complete form, and give it to them all at once, because that saves you time on their billing cycle.
Now, the big elephant in the room, Elizabeth, the one that scares the bejeebies out of me, you, and every other woman facing potential divorce. How do I pay for this? We've just thrown some astronomical numbers out there at you, and every woman says, I can't pay for this. Maybe it's because you didn't manage the money. Maybe you did manage the money and you know it's not there, or you don't know how to access the money. But how do I pay for this? Well, if you're one of the lucky ones, you've got savings. And I understand you've got savings, and everybody hears, as soon as this divorce is filed, don't touch any of the money. You haven't filed yet, and you have to pay for your attorney. So if you don't have cash savings, then what? What are we going to do? Okay. Most of us don't have that kind of cash sitting around where we can get to it. So unfortunately, look at your credit cards. Do you have a low income, low interest rate credit card that you might be able to put some of these costs on? The other is, if you've got a job, do you have a 401k? I know nobody wants to borrow out of their 401k, but you can, for this kind of expense, if you don't already have loans in your 401k, you can borrow from your 401k, because this would be considered, it for most companies, a family emergency or a personal emergency. You can borrow and pay yourself back, and they will take it out as you go forward. So you can use your 401k. Elizabeth mentioned something she's seen recently that's becoming a trend, of kind of a care credit type loan program with the attorney's office. What have you seen with that, Elizabeth?
Well, most attorneys have it on their site, and I don't know the name of the financial institution that provides this, but check with the attorneys that you're interviewing and find out if they have a payment plan or a financing plan in their office. And you just apply. A lot of them are right on their website, so you just click through and do the little application. And I say that it's kind of like care credit because to me that's an easy analogy to share with people. Like when you go to the dentist and you need a root canal and you don't know how you're going to pay for it, and voila, they have care credit. So there's something very similar that attorneys can offer you. And this is a good way to go ahead and get that set up. And to the point that you made, Allison, about not touching money, I know that this is such a common fear because we've been trained, we've been told that, as soon as you're going through a divorce, don't touch the money. You're not supposed to move stuff around, which is correct. But you may want to ask your attorney this question because in most states, the one exception to that rule is that you can use money outside of typical day-to-day living expenses. Obviously, you got to pay your bills, your mortgage, but you can use money for an attorney, and it doesn't fit inside that rule of don't touch the money. So check on that too, because it could vary from one state to the next. But certainly in Texas, you can use community property money for your retainer fee. You can pull that out.
The last ditch effort, borrowing from family or friends. It's not what we want to do. No one wants to do this, but for a lot of women, that is your only option, is to make some phone calls and see if you can borrow it. And, if that's the case, then you know that how much money there is at the end, if there's a house to be sold or whatever, something that you can pay them back when it's over.
Be sure to go back and check out the video that we did before this that talks about the questions that you should ask an attorney when you're in the interview process. And there's so much to talk about here regarding attorneys. So be sure to click the like button, subscribe to our channel, and follow us because we're going to be bringing more to you about some of the questions and the nuances of working with an attorney and moving through this phase of a divorce.